Welcome to the Theoretical Neuroscience podcast. I am the host, Gaute Einhold. In computational neuroscience, we depend on a lot of software tools. When I entered into the field in the mid-1990s, I attended the excellent Methods in Computational Neuroscience course at Woodsole outside Boston. Here I learned about the simulation tool NEURON, dedicated to biophysical modeling of neurons and neural networks. Today, NEURON is the most used tool for such modeling, and it has been used in more than 2,500 publications, and more than 800 mathematical models based on NEURON are available on the model database ModelDB. Many research groups, including our group in Norway, are relying on it to do their research. Today's guest, Michael Hines, working at the Department of Computer Science at Yale, has been the chief architect of NEURON since its infancy in the 1970s, and is still leading its development almost 50 years later. In the podcast, we talk about how the tool got started and the many developmental steps that has led to today's modern version of the software, including, for example, CoreNEURON optimized for parallel execution of large-scale network models on multicore supercomputers. My colleague Hans-Eckhard Plesser pointed me to a book, Neural Network Simulation Environments, from the early 1990s, where 11 different tools for neural simulations were described, including NEURON. From what I could see, only one of these 11 tools, NEURON, is actively used today, testifying to the skills and persistence of Michael Hines and a handful of colleagues in maintaining and developing it. In the podcast, we talk about how the small team behind NEURON has been able to do this, and how what has been dubbed a heroic development model is now changing to a more modern and collaborative process, facilitating the contributions from many developers. Thus, the future of this tool seems to be reassured, luckily, even if Michael Hines himself is no longer a spring chicken. As for all episodes, information about the episode and relevant links can be found at the webpage theoreticalneuroscience.no. And if you want to support the podcast, go to patreon.com/theoreticalneurosciencepodcast and choose a membership of your liking, for example, at the cost of $1 per episode. As a member, you will get access to a video version of the podcast recordings, as well as transcripts of each episode. And note that there is a 7-day free trial period when you sign up. I will be most grateful if you become a Patreon supporter to help me fund the production of the podcast, even if you're not too interested in looking at the videos. But I also appreciate all the other listeners, and I hope that all of you can help spread the word about the podcast to other people in the community on social media or otherwise. Okay, here is Michael. So, welcome to the podcast, Michael Hines.
Thanks for having me.
So, I think people in the community know sort of what you have made very well. The simulator, the software tool NEURON. They may not be, maybe less familiar with your name. Actually, you're sort of one of these, unknown heroes of the field, I would say, because you are you're sort of like a chief architect of NEURON, and you work at Yale at the Department of Computer Science. Is that true?
I'm in the Department of Neuroscience
Yeah.
at this time.
Yeah.
I moved to the lab of Gordon Shepard, who
Okay.
has
At Yale.
sadly
Yeah.
passed away now.
Mm-hmm.
And prior to that, I was affiliated with the Department of Computer Science at Yale. But I went to Yale in 1993 as a member of the new group called the Connecticut Theoretical and Applied Neuroscience.
So who was sort of?
It was an institute or something.
Yeah. So who was sort of? Was like a particular leader in the group, or?
Yes, that was Tom Brown there, and also Ted Carnevale.
Mm-hmm.
And after a few years, that was dissolved and became, then I was invited by Gordon to join his lab. So I'm a my career, I've always been on soft money in
Yeah.
NIH,
Yeah.
and so
Exactly.
I've always been
Mm.
happy to have a location with a
Mm.
person like Gordon or
Yeah.
John Moore.
Mm. So I guess I
At
mean
Duke.
I think your title is, I don't know. I saw one of your title was senior research scientist.
That's
And
correct.
yeah, and I guess in Europe you would have to be retired long time ago, right? But the
That's
thing is,
right.
yeah.
That's right.
So
So
I think I'm very happy that you have been keeping on working on neural until now, and so that I think the U.S.
well, my
retirement,
intention,
yeah.
okay, my intention has been to continue with it as much as I can or as long as
Mm,
I can.
mm,
Even without even when the time comes that I no longer have a formal position.
mm. So and you have, I think, at least over the last years, I sort of like neuron for me has been you and Carnivale, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
About a dozen years ago, we, in collaboration with Bill Litton at SUNY Downstate, we had a grant to extend Neuron into reaction diffusion.
Mm,
And in that process, we uh, began to collaborate with a new graduate student, or I should say, a just graduated graduate student,
mm,
Robert McDougall, and
yeah,
he's
sure.
been with us now, since about 2012 or so,
Mm,
and now he's kind of a co-PI on the main Neuron grant
mm.
that does the development and also continues work on the reaction
Mm.
diffusion
And
component of
Carnival,
that.
what's his first name? Ted? Is that no?
Ted Carnivale
Yeah.
has been with me since C10 days, or I've been with him or whatever. And
Since what
but
date?
but
C10?
Robert McDougall is the youngster in that.
Okay. the, the hope for the new generation. So
Right.
good. So I mean, I just sort of start with, I think, I mean, Neuron now, the simulation tools, Neuron has sort of essentially become the de facto standard, I think, for biophysics based modeling of electrical dynamics. I looked up some statistics, something like 2,500 publications where Neuron has been used, and I think there's 800 neuron models on the.
Yeah, it's hard to keep up to date with that list because the word neuron is maybe not the
Now
uh,
it's
best
sort of
word to search on the web
no,
for
no, that's true.
papers that might have used it for
Yeah.
publications
So,
or
but I guess you
so
didn't
forth.
think about that when you chose
Yeah,
the name back in the days.
didn't think
Uh,
in those terms.
yeah, and also now, I mean, our group, we are, in Norway has been, and many others have. I mean, we are not only using it, we are relying on it, because it's sort of like many. There's all these tools that has now been built on top of with sort of neuron under the hood in some sense. So if neuron stops working, then, for example, our tool LFPi, which deals with computational electric brain signals, will stop working also. So it's really really an important
Well,
tool.
yeah, that's true. I think that it's at a state where it would probably be fairly easy to continue having it work. That is, in terms of maintenance and so forth.
Hmm.
It's maybe more difficult to extend into new domains, things like that.
Mm.
But
Yeah,
there have recently been, a real push to get rid of all the old attic things that
yeah,
were things that were not really all that useful anymore.
yeah.
The project started in the mid '70s and has kind of developed in accordance with
Mm. But
people who are interested in
yeah,
certain kinds of usage that
so
I've tried to
yeah.
help them with that.
I saw this cartoon. It was called AXKC. One of these like this what anyway science oriented cartoons where the joke was sort of, well, that everything that you have all this neuron, this big software, I mean, projects building on top of something, and it's only one guy in Nebraska who really who knows sort of exactly what's going on under the hood. So if this person can do it, work
that
on
was
more.
quite true for NEURON. I would say up to a few years ago.
Yeah.
In the advent of the Blue Brain project, which has been kind of one of the most fun projects I've ever been associated with.
Yeah.
In which we kind of, up to that point, we were probably concentrating mostly on graphics, utility, so forth, try to extend the domain in that direction in terms of ease of use. But that kind of switched then some of the emphasis to using NEURON in the context of networks, and also because of the kinds of machines they were using, it was very interesting to be involved in the high performance side of things. And now there are a few people in that group who continue to help with NEURON as well in terms of development. And so there's been a big push the last couple of years to kind of modernize the program. It's now fully C++ and so forth. And use as much as possible, existing frameworks. So, definitely, in C++, the standard template library for vectors and things. And but I think that, it's probably somewhat easier to enter into the development process now. But some of the people have been using quite sophisticated C++, which means that I have to get back into the learning style as well, since it can get kind of subtle in terms of its usage, in terms of development.
So, yeah.
So I'm in this. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I just so this has been in the context of the Blue Brain project that has sort of supported this infrastructure. I would call it software infrastructure development with NEURON.
Yes. So I've been through RCS in terms of software management.
RCS, what is that?
RCS, Revision Control System.
Okay.
And then CVS and SVN and Mercurial and now GitHub.
Oh.
And so we really rely now on GitHub to
development and maintenance.
Provide, the base for continuous integration and the
so being
development of documentation and so forth. So we're relying on a lot of free resources now that I hope will continue.
Yeah. Because now, I mean, I'm not really much of a computer person, even though everything we do is sort of computational neuroscience. But at least I know GitHub, so I'm not completely unfamiliar. Well, the other ones I was sort of...
everyone should, or something similar. It's a very nice...
Yeah, obviously we use that.
Way of controlling your software development process.
So first, I mean, what can really NEURON do? I mean, what is the function? I mean, one thing is to compute. I mean, I guess the most common use is to compute membrane potentials in neurons, right?
Yes, I always say that its principal domain, from the beginning, has been electrophysiology problems where you think that cable properties are important in the understanding of what's happening in the experiments, and also fairly complicated or possibly complicated membrane properties, different kinds of channels, and those always come within an environment itself that may involve instrumentation, and hence the ability. It's useful to be able to add linear circuits into the mix, having to do with electrodes and some of the instrumentation properties, capacitance, compensation, things like that. And also, under certain circumstances, for networks, we definitely rely on what's called a fixed step method, where you advance in time the simulation step by step, but those steps are on the order of about 25 microseconds.
But I guess also, a key thing is really that it deals with complicated dendritic structures. Because I
Right,
think,
right. So there again, the notion of cable properties,
exactly.
plays a big role.
Because I think the people who do heart simulations, I never, know some people there, and they often have complicated mix of ion channels, but they typically assume it's like a single, what we would say a single compartment model, so you don't have to deal with this dendrites and
Right,
nothing like
but
branching and stuff.
those are coupled together with gap junctions,
Yeah.
which again then makes
Makes,
resolves back into kind of a two-dimensional cable in a sense,
yeah. So
or three-dimensional cable.
and I think you started with this in the 70s, and that was sort of, you were a contemporary with the RAL, right? And so this was sort of like, the cable structure studies of RAL, that was like, I guess, early 60s and stuff. So it was sort of
out of graduate school in 76. I went to a lab at Duke that was run by John Moore of TTX fame.
TTX,
and,
what is that?
Tetrodotoxin, which
So
blocks the sodium channel of the squid.
Okay.
And he every summer also went to Woods Hole to do squid axon experiments. And he and a cell physiologist by the name of Joe Blum wrote a grant together called Computer Methods for Physiological Problems. And it was divided into two: neural simulations and simulations of flagellar motility. And turns out that some of the same mathematics is used in both of those fields. So they were looking for someone who could do some applied mathematics on that problem and start up as a postdoc for that grant. And that's how when I graduated from University of Chicago, then I went to Duke to work with them on those problems. After a few years, I think we got to the point in flagellar motility where we probably had reached a theoretical point which was a little bit beyond the experimental possibilities of looking into it at that time. And so, in combination, I more or less switched full time then to the neural side of
because
simulations.
flagellar motility, that's sort of like this bacteria that has some kind of propeller at the end, right?
These are the more of the eukaryotic flagella and cilia, which have their 9+2, internal microtubule structure. And
but it was not really dendrites at that point, right?
Yeah, but the idea was that converting chemical energy into mechanical motion by sliding tubules among between each other. So, I then, pretty much concentrated entirely on the neural part of the computer methods, and
because there was this trick that you invented, right? This what's called the Hines solver.
Well, that's
what is
commonly that's commonly thought, but in fact, I think that that trick is much more thought of as more of a just the standard minimum what do you call it in Gaussian elimination, minimum degree ordering.
Okay.
Yeah. In order you can solve the tree equation. It turns out, interestingly, is exactly same computational complexity, and I mean by exactly even the same number of arithmetic operations
I
and the
see.
same operations,
Yes.
addition and subtraction,
There's a computer
multiplication,
scientist talking.
and right, but it's exactly the same as the cable, an
Yeah.
unbranched cable.
Yeah. So the thing is that with this, I mean, when you have a major challenge is sort of when you have these branched cable structures that you typically have in like like neuronal dendritic structures, then of course you have to sort of connect these branches at these junctions, and so you get this coupled set of, I guess, typically differential equations, and then so to solve that efficiently, you use this whatever, the Hines trick or whatever.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly,
So
exactly.
that sped up things a lot.
Right. So when I went to Duke, we were using computers, mini computers like the PDP, the Digital Equipment Corporation
Mm.
PDP series,
Yeah, I
PDP
remember those.
8 and
So
15. In fact, at the time, John Moore had a hybrid computer, PDP 15, connected to I don't remember the name, EIA, I think, hybrid computer.
okay.
And we started, programming the cable equation on that hybrid computer. In other words, the hybrid part would compute the membrane properties, the currents from the channels, and the digital computer. Oh, it would also compute as well the connectivity or the coupling of compartments to form a cable.
Uh-huh.
And then the digital computer would supply the adjacent voltages of the whatever compartment the analog computer was working on at the moment.
Wow. Yeah.
And we quickly observed that you couldn't go very long on the analog computer working on a single compartment because the adjacent compartments were changing. And so in the end, it was most efficient for the hybrid computer to only work on a compartment for, again, a single time step. Okay. Because anything that you did longer than a single time step would become out of date because the other compartments were changing on that same time scale.
Okay.
So in the end, then it turned out, well, it was faster just to do the whole thing on the digital as a digital problem.
So so that was and then but I mean the development of this, I mean, I know the people have I know quite well the people who develop Nest, which is sort of this tool for sort of doing simulation with point neurons, while neuron is sort of mainly like used for multi-compartment neurons, and for the Nest people, they have also been developing simulators for a long time, but they also sort of they develop new features as the needs arise, sort of. Typically, has that also been the way that new features have been added to?
Very, very definitely. It's really necessary to stay in close collaboration with the user community who either require different things, and they make their way into Neuron if they're fairly generic. Okay.
Yeah.
So, the idea of events is new in Neuron in the very late 90s on a single processor. And the idea of, like we say, it oftentimes becomes really useful to use variable order, variable time step methods for the integration of all the equations. Because if things are happening faster than your chosen time step, they get completely lost in the integration method for fixed time step. Whereas variable integration methods then reduce the time step to a small fraction of that fastest time constant that's actually happening in the system. So that's been very useful for
Because I
complicated cells.
Because I guess you often need. I guess the fastest thing is happening in the brain is the action potential, and then to simulate that, you often need sort of like a microsecond, or maybe not a microsecond, but
Right, right.
yeah, something
And
like
also they come into their own, when, action potentials happen, well, relatively infrequently
yeah.
in a single cell.
So then you can sort of
And
change the time
the only
resolution.
the only reason that variable time steps methods aren't used generally for network problems is that every synaptic event requires a reinitialization. It's a new problem because there's been a abrupt change in either one of the state variables or in a parameter or something to cause a change. That's what the synapse
Mm,
does. An event arrives and
yeah,
changes the conductance, for example, of a channel.
mm,
That requires that the variable step method start over again from scratch. It's a new initial value problem. And of course, what you have in a network is continuous floods of these events.
uh,
So it can never really get started because there's always an event arriving every microsecond. So, yeah, because a cell, when it may fire you know, every other, twice a second,
mm,
for example, or 100 times a second. But that event gets sent to 10,000 or 50,000 other cells. So, the,
uh,
the expansion that way makes it impossible to use the variable step
mm,
methods. Ironically, though, for the heart, the
mm,
gap junctions, because we've done some simulations of heart models with neuron as well,
mm,
with the Michele Migliore. And there, the variable step method works quite well because the gap junction coupling is continuous. So it's not an event when
mm,
something is coupled to another
mm,
location,
yeah,
but is just part of the overall, set of coupled ordinary differential
mm,
equations. And
mm.
very CVOD works very well in that context. The
I guess
variable
because
step
I think
method.
if I mean the heart simulations, they don't really have these sharp events. So I guess that makes things
Exactly.
easier.
Right. The coupling
Uh,
is continuous.
So
It's
if our
not
brain had
divided
been
into
analog and
events.
not digital or not having them, things would have been easier
Right.
for
Right.
you. Yeah. So, but I mean, this okay. So this is now I talked about the electrical sort of like, which I think is the main use, but also this. You also mentioned this reaction diffusion aspect that has been added. Then I guess more recently, particularly this Robert
Yes,
McDougall.
it has um, since more or less from the beginning. With the start of the model description language that's
Mm,
been used with Neuron, there's always been the possibility of reaction diffusion in a very, within a single compartment.
mm.
That
Maybe you
one
can
can
just
set up.
briefly, well, sort of tell people what reaction diffusion.
Well, they're just chemical reactions. You have, probably there's a descent into jargon here, but
Mm,
various levels. But they're, one of the methods for describing chemical systems is with kinetic schemes. In other words, the normal using the normal reaction style of description for things that A plus B combines to form C plus D,
mm,
so forth,
mm,
or that A moves from one place to another uh, diffusively.
mm,
Uh, so, and that combination of reaction and diffusion. In other words, voltage channels themselves can be described as kinetic schemes, and
mm. Yeah.
as opposed to Hodgkin Huxley is just three uh, very short kinetic schemes. Something's on or off, and it moves back and forth from its on to its off state,
Mm,
and using simple flux or how much material moves from one state to another. is more or less the reaction style language for these equations. And the model description language always allowed that, but it was more restricted to within complicated things happening within a single compartment.
But that
One of
now
the,
has been.
oh, go
Yeah.
ahead.
Go ahead. No, I was just saying that has now expanded so that you can diffuse to neighboring compartments and stuff. Or
Right. So the diffusion part, allows this to, these materials to move to adjacent compartments. And also, in a lot of cases, in the diffusion kind of requires a three-dimensional structure to things rather than the one-dimensional cable equation. The spatial extent of voltage is fairly lengthy compared to the interaction length of single reactions and so forth. And diffusion tends to, there tends to be a lot at the level of the cell micro or ultra structure. Things tend to be organized spatially so that certain interacting parts obviously are close together, which helps the process of diffusion carry out, is sufficient then to allow the process to continue. The machine really can be quite complicated.
And I guess the key thing here is to, for example, when you have like this calcium activated potassium channels. So if you have, so if you can sort of model the calcium concentration inside the cell at different positions.
Exactly.
That's sort of like a key.
So that was allowed. The more localized you are, then the more sense it makes to put all of that machinery into a single compartment, so that which can be as complicated as you wish. But then when it finally couples to the effect of voltage on the cell, then that, you're back in the one-dimensional cable world again, that there'll be a transmission of voltage along the length of the cable.
So I started my sort of I used to do solid state physics back in the days, and then in 1995 I attended this fantastic course in computational neuroscience at Woods Hole. So there where I was also introduced to NEURON. So NEURON was already around then, and then when we started to use it in our group, I mean like students in our group. So then what I really remembered was that when they got stuck, and I couldn't help them because I never said, I only played around a little bit with NEURON. But when they contacted you, they said, "Oh, their ads, they are so positive and they're helpful." And so I think this of building I think you've been very good at building a community by being so supportive and helpful.
I agree. Yeah. I'll tell you a story.
Yeah.
It was probably in the mid or late 80s, perhaps. There was a conference and in California. I think it was at UCSD, Southern California, maybe. That was organized partly by Michael Arbib, and John Moore and I went to that conference, and it was the very first time we ever heard the word computational neuroscience.
Yeah.
And we were struck by it because of its inherent ambiguity. You had a talk with Terry Sinofsky some time ago, podcast, in which the idea of computational neuroscience was very special for neuroscience, because the neuroscience was performing computations. The question would be what computations they were performing. It wasn't just using computers to simulate the brain, but it had that inherent ambiguity in it as to what you meant by computational, where the biology itself was carrying out computations. That struck us as is very interesting. And we got back from that conference, and we renamed our John Moore renamed his lab, just put a note on the door, the Laboratory for Computational Neuroscience at that time. And what we had concluded in our discussions, John and I together, is that yes, the process of simulation, or the use of the computer in simulation, always kind of requires that one wear three hats or have three people involved. One is the science, which is actually takes first place, and is what are you trying to understand conceptually, and what's the physical behavior of that thing that you're trying to understand. The second hat is the actual computational neuroscientist, who comes up with a conceptual model, fairly abstraction, quite a bit of abstraction from the reality, but has a particular human focus on certain behavior of the physical system, and encapsulates that in a model. And that conceptual model, then, the third hat, is how do you translate that onto the computer, because it may involve a lot of processing to understand the qualitative nature of the model that you've come up with, that you think captures something about the physical system. And that last step is supposed to be a very faithful representation of the conceptual model. And hence was born, the idea of, well, that's maybe our niche in the computational neuroscience world, to provide a tool that a computational neuroscientist can use to develop a kind of targeted application then that the experimentalist can use.
Huh?
And generally speaking, graphics helps a lot in that process, at the end stage. And so at the same time, the development of the tool and wrestling the computer into a useful state so that you can explore your model, your conceptual model, is also requires a good deal of effort and help. And so we've always taken the point that if you're using NEURON, you should also be using a person, asking questions and so forth. There should always be someone available to help you with that process. I'm struggling with moving to Visual Studio Code at the present for development.
What is that?
It's basically an editor to help you write code. It's Visual C, essentially Microsoft's product. Visual Studio Code, I think, is maybe more open source. I'm not sure. But it's an extremely complicated development environment that if you were familiar with it, you would be very, very, very empowered to write code more effectively.
I see.
And but if you're not familiar with it, you're staring at this complicated thing and not knowing what to do. So there's the computer. How do you use it? And that always has required a person. Maybe ChatGPT will help with that too.
Yeah.
but I think that's key, is that a person comes along with the program.
And also, you've been really active in organizing courses. These courses, and also often sort of like associated with some like SFN, Society for Neuroscience meetings, and other sort of. It seems that like wherever I go, you are. So NEURON is also there.
Yes, we. And Ted Carnevale is the person most associated with those courses. I was involved, obviously, for many years. I've kind of I enjoy the programming aspects, the development aspects, and helping individuals most aspects of this process. So I've kind of stepped back from the teaching, and now Ted and Robert are mostly handling those courses. But that gets you started, and the courses, we learned quickly that the less programming involved, the better.
On the course.
For beginners.
Yeah.
It's very hard to keep everybody together if they're programming at the same time. The number of mistakes that are made is different kinds of mistakes is huge. And so you really need either to pair up or to have enough TAs there to get people over the problems of programs that you've just written that don't work.
Because you all Neuron always had a graphical interface, right?
Well, you can't say always.
Okay,
but
so
it's a long time.
1995, I guess, when I encountered it.
91. I chose interviews, which was a C++ library for graphics programming on top of X11, and I've been using it ever since. It's now feeling its age, and we would like to move all of those tools that have been developed into more web-based things. But that's a project that needs to be done incrementally.
Yeah, exactly.
But I like the combination of graphics and programming.
Yeah, like scripting.
Where the programming consists of smaller fragments rather than fairly complicated, large objects that have all the issues of.
You don't really have a web-based solution yet, or
not yet.
No.
One of the problems is that I believe that that there's alternatives as well, and so it's a matter of choice, and you might regret your choice.
What do you mean alternatives in terms of?
For example, there's always been for quick writing of graphical interfaces. Now I'm blocking on the name, but it's a household word for writing, and it's available in Python and so forth.
Okay.
There are plenty of frameworks, and we're speaking. I think you're on a Mac as well right now. I'm on a Mac. To do that kind of programming right is fairly complicated, but there are tools for writing interfaces.
Okay.
And here again, you need to get to the point with a program where you're not thinking about the program, you're thinking about what is it that you want to do. And that and you have enough facility with the program that's almost, unconscious. It's like using your editor. I want to do something, well, type away a little bit and you've done it. Whereas with these, if you're unfamiliar with something, you're constantly being distracted and going to the reference material. So how did somebody else do something similar? And that's a real stopping point.
So, but now I guess scripting is becoming more prevalent, or maybe it isn't. So that like 1/3 of your of the neuron models on ModelDB is using this graphical interface.
Right. So some of it is very simple and straightforward. You just want to see something on the screen. The other is at the other end of that scale is that you're controlling your entire simulation. You launch the program, and everything you do on the screen is graphics, or everything you're doing then with the program is graphically oriented. And
but I guess
that's very helpful for people. I think that's a combination of the two, where you organize your simulation project as a workflow, which then you can carry out, graphically on your screen, is a reasonably good way of managing a simulation project. Some people are doing that with Jupyter notebooks, I think. But in that case, my opinion is that there's just not enough. It doesn't really capture the process of a simulation project.
Okay. Because you have your own sort of scripting language called, isn't it Hawk files or something?
Well, yes, that started basically in 1984 I learned about it when I read the book by Kernighan and Pike, The Unix Programming Environment. And I think chapter 7 or 8 of that book was, how do you use Unix to carry out a program development project? And so they introduced this HOKE interpreter, which stands for High Order Calculator. And I began to use that. I thought, well, this is a great, beginning to the process of, controlling a simulation. In other words, what we do is we have fairly extensive amount of code we've written in terms of small functions and so forth, and we would just want to compose them together to make a more complicated program. So, libraries of functions can be, glued together to do more complicated things. And being an interpreter, HOKE, if we write some functions in the underlying C or C++ code, using the interpreter, we can just use the interpreter as a fairly complicated input-output language.
Isn't this a bit like Python can do, or?
It's exactly, but see, I predate Python.
Okay, exactly. Yeah.
And, perhaps certainly haven't done it as well as Python did it. And that's kind of why we're, saying, well, really Python is better than HOKE in myriad ways. So let's use that instead. But at the same time, you have many, many years of old legacy models and things that have been done. So the critical point, for that switch has been that Python should be able to look into NEURON and retrieve, and expose anything that's been done in HOKE over the years. And that's what it can do. So there's all of the legacy models can be run starting with a Python launch of the.
I guess that there's something called there was
that includes the graphics, by the way, as well.
So this Pi neuron, what's it called, Neuron Pi, or there's some Python wrapper of Neuron now, isn't that what's called that?
Exactly. I mean, Python is completely independent. You can either launch Python and import Neuron, or you can launch Neuron and give it an argument, which is minus Python. And then Python is the interpreter. Neuron is running, but Python is the interpreter console that you're typing commands into. And everything available in Neuron is available in Python. And if you're in the Neuron, or if you're in the HOKE world, everything that's exists in Python is available from HOKE as well. So there's a fairly complete interaction between the two. So but meanwhile, all the performance requirements are met at the C++ level through compiled code. Again, these functions and data and so forth that have been laid out in computer memory in a fairly high performance specific way.
Yeah, exactly. So I think our tool LFPy is also, I mean, it sort of imports Neuron into.
So that back in the day, I think it was very common to try to organize your programs that way. That is, a library of functions and data which could be then composed at a higher level using an interpreter.
Yeah.
And
Back in the day, isn't it?
well, I mean, that we happened in it. Well, I think it's still the case, but
Oh.
we started out this way with in the late 70s with
Exactly.
a focal interpreter. There'd be a few functions written in Fortran,
Yeah.
but they would be hooked together using a string of script statements
I see.
using BASIC or focal at the time. That was the DEC language.
Hmm.
In fact, that to this day, focal had the interesting property or the limited where all of its functions had to begin with the letter F.
Oh, really?
Yes, that was just a requirement of the language, and
Well,
and so that's the reason why in Neuron there's the function F advance and F initialized. F advance goes a time step, and F initializes the model.
I see. Well, everything has a reason, or
Yeah,
many things has a
yeah.
reason.
The rationale is completely gone, but the original choice lives on.
So, I mean, now, I guess the first one in 70s and 80s, and I mean, the computer power was limited, so you couldn't really do large networks. But now people want to do large networks, and so I guess
Yeah, they want to do
parallelization.
larger networks than you can compute.
Yeah, exactly. No, I mean, exactly. So you would like, I would exactly. I could use any kind of growing computer power without and
Exactly.
ask and use it to ask new scientific questions. But again, I mean, you have sort of I saw that you have sort of parallelized it and used up to I was at 128,000 processes at the same time.
That's right.
Yeah.
Actually, it was run once on the Argonne supercomputer, the Blue Gene Q at the time, a few
Okay.
years back,
Yeah.
which had over 1 million processors.
Wow.
And those were great machines, the Blue Gene series, because it was automatically, everything was automatically balanced. I'm using balanced in a kind of a funny way. If you doubled the number of processors, you also doubled your memory and you doubled your bandwidth. And it's because you were just adding entire computers into the cluster. And so as long and because we were only exchanging spikes, and spikes are fairly rare events compared to the
All the things.
what the actual things that are required to compute during a time step. A spike will be generated every 1,000 events from a particular location. Sorry, not 1,000. The spike will be generated every 1,000 time steps. Let's say it'll be delivered to 10,000 other cells, but its generation is rare compared to the computation on that object. But and so it turned out that on those kinds of machines, it was more or less free to get linear speed up with the number of computers you used in your cluster, because the communication of spikes was a fairly small
So,
part
okay,
of the
exactly. So
computation.
there's never. I mean, a single neuron was only involved in one process. So that was not.
Right, though that's the first. That's the first thing you get is that yes, each neuron is fairly independent.
Oh.
And but if you get to the point where you have more computers than you have neurons,
Yeah.
then it becomes useful to split the neuron into pieces.
Okay.
And then now
That sounds like a
it's
headache.
not just an event that takes place, but those pieces must communicate every time step,
Yeah.
and they need to communicate in a way that still is numerically stable.
Yeah.
Okay. And so that was when that was in 2006, we added or seven, we added the multi-split method into Neuron. And so there was a period of time in which that was very useful, on machines, but clearly it's not so useful if there are many more cells than there are computers, than there are processors. Okay. So again, there's a domain of applicability for the method, which is useful, that can speed things up, but it's not in every case useful.
Because I guess now, I mean, a major challenge with this maintaining this and keeping this kind of tool up to date and useful for new generations is sort of to be able to deal with all these like new chip architectures. You have like, I mean, I guess normal
Exactly,
CPUs and
exactly.
GPUs
Up
and
until
different.
2003, we just relied on the doubling of the clock rate to help
Yeah.
us out, and
Mm.
that was just
Yeah.
for us, just free performance
Yeah.
improvements.
Exactly.
But yes, uh,
Yeah.
with the advent of the non-uniform memory architecture kinds of things, it has become as important to lay out your data properly in memory so that it is accessible uh, to with minimal latency and maximum use of bandwidth from memory to the CPU,
Mm.
that
So what is the
you take
status
that into
now?
account.
If I sort
Sorry,
of
I didn't.
yeah, sorry.
What is the what?
No, I just thinking, what is the status now if I have this neuron program with for a network, and I want to run it sort of developed in on my like personal computer, say my Apple, and then I want to, well, first I want to sort of take it to a supercomputer, like multi processor computer, and then maybe also to a GPU. What
Yes,
can is that for? I guess it's a headache for you, but is it easy for me?
easy is a fairly ambiguous
Yeah.
word.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of easy,
Okay.
but what's involved, I think, probably is more important from the user perspective, is the conceptual control over the model.
Mm,
If you're working on your laptop, I think you can do a small version of the model. Okay,
mm,
and you should, be get to the point of being fairly comfortable with the model and its usage, and have it validated as much as you can. Um, but if you want to scale it up so that it's too large to either fit or to compute in a reasonable time on your laptop, then it's ready to use on a supercomputer uh, with many cores. So you develop the program, with that in mind in the future, scalability. It's always going to be necessary when you carry out a simulation project to occasionally throw everything away except one little component of your model and look at that in detail. And what
mm,
is that channel actually doing in a
mm.
voltage clamp setting? Or what's this one cell doing, in the context of all the flood of spikes that it's getting, so forth.
Mm.
So a program, I think, is is most helpful when you can focus on something that you're interested in without too much difficulty,
Mm.
and that focus doesn't require fundamental change to your way of doing things in your model. So when you do go to the large model, on a supercomputer, a whole new category of problems uh, arises,
Yeah.
and in terms of just errors, that uh, the fact that it's on a parallel computer, uh, is the whole model being built? There have to be debugging techniques, methods to allow you to answer any question that arises so that you can focus on either non-intuitive behaviors or you know there's a bug, but where is it?
Mm.
So forth.
Mm.
There are really nice idioms that one can apply over and over and over again, so that when you have a scaled up model, you can find any kind of issue that results. So, for example, we want to one thing to do is go to the computer. Are you getting the same when you go to the supercomputer? Do you get the same results? A lot of
Yeah.
times, I think that more or less ends up practically being the spike train on the smaller model works. Is still the same as
Mm.
on the larger, as on the on
Supercomputer.
your desktop.
Mm.
If there's if it's not the same,
Mm.
then why? And by the way, that includes randomness as well. You
Mm.
need to be able to have a model that involves random connections and random things that are happening at the synapses and so forth.
Mm.
But you need to be able to reproduce the results. So it's kind of it's a controlled randomness in which, yes, you can make a statistically independent run, but you can also do the exact same run,
Mm.
including all the randomness,
Mm.
even though you distribute the cells differently, you're splitting them into pieces, so forth, that on a massively parallel computer, still want to get the same results.
Mm.
So there are very definite methods, to do all that. And instead of reading a large article, sometimes it's helpful just to ask, how do you how do
Mm.
you how do you
Mm.
deal with those
Yeah.
problems?
Yeah.
Because there's been enough experience that we've seen, a lot of different kinds of
Mm.
issues that developed and how to resolve them.
Yeah. Cool. Now, of course, now we can also, I guess, I mean, if you want to run them, you can, I mean, you get these supercomputers and like, for example, I mean, that sometimes are, well, they where you can apply for time at least to
Right.
run models. So there are sort of like, if you are a sort of a new user and don't and needs to, but I guess that typically you just start with your home computer and
Right. Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. I think one of the critical things is to make your model scalable.
Mm.
Think in terms of the future.
Mm.
And to what extent can you make small versions of your model just with a parameter of some kind of size parameter, one or more size parameters
Mm.
associated with it, so that you can uh, when you do see problems, you can focus in on them. Is the problem still conceptually there in the small version? It's a
Mm.
lot easier to run a small problem 50 times than it is to run a
Yeah.
large problem
And of
50
course,
times, especially when you don't know exactly where the problem is occurring.
yeah. And I guess also, I mean, at least the kind of modeling we do, we don't want to like to compare with experiments. And then you need to run the model many times sort of to see, look for like how sensitive
Exactly.
it is to parameters. And so it's like one thing is to do like one heroic study sort of a huge network and get one result out. But
Yeah,
that's
I
sort of
think a single run is always
uh,
insufficient.
yeah, that is sort of more like a pilot, yeah, to impress people with numbers of neurons and
Right.
stuff. But I mean,
Right.
that's fine too. Sort of to
Yeah.
explore sort of like the possibilities. So, and then you can also run it in the cloud. Or I haven't, I
Yeah,
never
I
used.
myself have not done that
No, me
much.
neither. I don't
Okay,
know.
so there are always new possibilities, to become aware of.
Yeah.
I mostly, and for learning things that I
Yeah.
don't already know, for learning new things. Like I say, I'm most interested in the Visual Studio Code and
Yeah.
applying
Mm.
large language models or applying AI
Mm.
for for AI assisted programming. I think that's probably what I should work on.
Yeah. And there's also some, I mean, there are some, like, I mean, it has been made the last, I guess, particularly last decade, some prominent large scale models or like some impressive large numbers. Like, I mean, Michele Migliore, you have collaborated with him quite a
I
bit, right?
have.
Within the Human Brain Project and now also with eBrains. So he has done some, he has like a 500,000 neuron model, doesn't he? For with the biophysically detailed neurons in neuron or hippocampus. Is
Yes,
that
he
correct?
has. He did that independently. I was not really involved in that
Okay.
project of
Mhm.
his. I think there's a hippocampus. You're probably referring to his
Yeah, I
hippocampus
think it's like
model.
also the area CA1. But I think also Ivan Soltesh at Stanford has also made this large.
Yes. One of his students, Ivan Rykov,
Yeah.
has been able to use Neuron with
Mm,
GPUs as
mm,
well. There's a version of, I would say that one of the projects that was carried out with the Blue Brain project was to uh, uh, take all of the internal number crunching parts of Neuron and uh, aggregate them into a smaller library called CoreNEURON.
yeah.
And then that small library was more amenable to high performance computer experts in terms of understanding them and modifying them in terms of their memory usage and some of the algorithms that were used to do the number crunching, the computations. And that exists in Neuron today, and it's in use. Uh, it's a slightly more complicated way of using Neuron, but not much more. More or less, you import CoreNeuron,
Mm,
and then you say CoreNeuron.enable
yeah.
is true, and then
I can do
if you
that.
set up your model
Yeah.
in a typical
Yeah.
supercomputer fashion,
Mm,
then it'll run with CoreNeuron,
yeah.
and hopefully you'll get you know well if it's on the GPU, much faster
Mm.
results.
Exactly. So
But
it's for speed up essentially.
right, so it's solely for purposes of performance
Yeah.
and higher performance, and with very large models, you get more. You do get better performance that
Mm,
way. We're trying now to take the lessons we've learned in that project, the algorithms, the memory layout, so forth, the organization of things, and adopt them in Neuron proper. Okay.
mm,
And that's one of the purposes of the Neuron version 9 that we're working on right now. It
yeah.
unfortunately seems kind of an ever receding thing because meanwhile, all other kinds of issues are always cropping up in terms of bug fixes and
Yeah.
so forth.
Yes, the
And
devil is in the details. That really
right,
applies to
right,
this.
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but hopefully that'll be out,
So that core
by the end of the
neuron
year.
will and neuron will sort of merge, maybe sort of.
I think so. I
Mm,
think so.
yeah.
And
Mm,
so, and in that case, there wouldn't be a real distinction between
mm,
core neuron and
yeah.
neuron. Neuron would just be using the
Mm,
performance benefits that we
mm.
uh,
So you mentioned
observed.
the blue brain models,
Right.
which are sort of I guess it's like a main paper came in 2015, but they're still developing it, and there's also then I think like there's a model from the Allen Institute with Anton Arkhipov where they use this for the mouse primary visual cortex. I think with some like 50,000 biophysically detailed neurons,
Mhm.
and has some combination with inputs from like spiking neurons. So that is also a possibility, right? To use this different kind of coarse grainedness for because the by physically detailed model neurons are always more computationally requires more compute power than integrated fire neuron point neurons, right?
That's
So I guess
correct.
a combination can be useful. And there they have embedded it in this what's called brain modeling toolkit. There's on the BMTK. So they're making this
Now,
another.
who's that brain modeling to it? Is that the Allen Institute?
That's Allen Institute with
Okay. Yep.
the
All right.
group of Anton Arkhipov and others. And then you also have I guess a collaboration with this with NetPine. So they have also integrated NEURON into their like more
Yeah,
general
yeah.
network simulation tool with Salvador Durabanal, and they made some model for the motor cortex. So this is sort of a NEURON is either up front, like in a model of Migliore, or under the hood, right?
Right,
Yeah, so
right.
it's either here or there. So it's really becoming this key development, key tool. Well, it has been for a long time. I also read in there was this paper in 2014 by Gewaltig and Cannon, and which was about sort of like development of simulation tools. And Gewaltig, Mark Oliver, has sort of also been he's still a key developer of Nest. And he said that NEURON has sort of been developed under what they call the heroic development model.
I don't know
Which,
about heroic, but yeah, it's
yeah,
been
no, but I mean, it's one
mostly
person,
my
there's
development. Yeah,
one person in Nebraska, right? Almost, yeah, not quite in Nebraska. So it's really you and sort of and a small group of collaborators, I guess,
right.
Carnival and McDougall.
It's been a cottage industry for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
You know,
But
with support
now,
from NIH.
yeah.
Yeah,
In the paper from 2022, which I'll link to on this, on the homepage of this episode, where we wrote about, you say we now establish a radically updated development model and life cycle of the NEURON software. So what has changed?
well, this has been, yeah, I mean, this is part of this is the adoption of, CoreNEURON into Neuron
Mm,
itself, all the methods of CoreNEURON. So, or that was one component. But I think the modernization uh, refers to, the switch from a kind of a combined C and C++ and the uh, construction, which at the time there might have when it was first uh, added into Neuron, there might not have been any other choice to do so. So we would do a lot of home written fundamental uh, algorithms that one now would find in the standard template library or in
mm,
in other well known libraries that have an independent support to them and testing and so forth. And also the large amount of effort that that or the benefits I should probably with that idea of things like GitHub and the fact that you then can automatically when you make a change to your program that the documentation gets updated on
mm,
readthedocs.io. So and the continuous integration and testing and code coverage and all kinds of development tools to help write better code and more reliable code.
mm,
So, getting rid of old, unused things, alternatives. If there are too many uh, uh, conditional if statements, in terms of compile time if statements, it makes the code harder to read. It's nice to maybe get rid of some of the old stuff.
mm.
Do we really need to support an ADM3 terminal? Maybe not.
I don't know.
So maybe a
Uh,
lot of times, it's possible
uh,
just to just throw
uh,
away a file
uh,
or whatever.
yeah.
But there are
Mm.
things that date back to
But I
Mac
mean,
OS 9, for
mm.
example. I
One
think
thing is that you need, I mean, you have something like GitHub sort of to facilitate like a
right,
joint
right.
development of software, but you still need people who actually do the work also, right? I mean,
Well,
is it,
they have to, yeah, you have to have people who know how to use it as
yeah,
well.
and also to
So I used
contribute,
to know how to do everything in
yeah.
Neuron, and now that's less true
Mm.
because
But I
I'm
understand you can sort of
very
like,
unfamiliar with the continuous integration
uh,
process and so things like that.
but I guess as I said that on GitHub you can also then keep a statistics over all these commits, which as I understand it, that sort of tells how many like when people contribute to the code, and that
Exactly.
has like there's many more users to contribute to the
Right.
code now.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. The more it used to be the case. right now, installation, I think, is kind of at the peak of its effectiveness in the sense of the pip install type of thing. Okay. But that needs to be maintained. For example, in Python, I believe setup.py is considered what? Obsolete now? You shouldn't be using it anymore.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't really know myself, but
No.
the point is that packaging, a lot of things evolve, and in the end, for the end user, they're probably always better, but for the developer, it can cause problems because what used to work no longer works, or something has changed in an internal library. And so there is always a process of maintenance, how much continues to work. And it's nice to have a test suite that tests these things so you can find the problems early. And every year or two, there's a new Python. We're up to Python 3.12 now with.
But these are mainly volunteers who contribute, right? They're not paid by.
Completely. Yeah. The only source of funding in the past has been grants, which have as their emphasis new things, things that are innovative. Okay. And so things like graphics, which are extremely important to the user community, kind of have to be done on the side, so to speak, or in your spare time, because there's not any opportunity to really get a research grant to do that kind of thing.
No, it is a challenge, right? Because you have sort of special infrastructure grants, maybe for like physical equipment, like
that did exist. There was for a period of 10 or 15 years, there was NIH did have a what are they called? Their program announcements, where they request grants on a particular topic. And one of these topics was continuing maintenance and development of biological software. So it was ideal for Neuron, and we were funded for quite a few years under that program announcement.
I think also this Con Zuckerberg, isn't it? Con Zuckerberg Foundation. Also, we actually applied.
They exist, but I don't know that they're so much interested in maintenance of old software as.
But I think it's just this idea that the research community in general, maybe like the experimental neuroscience community, for example, don't realize that this is sort of an infrastructure that needs to be maintained. That it's not something that you cannot just a PhD student cannot just develop the software needed to do his or her work properly. I mean, at least when it comes to
as I mentioned or kind of implied, a person that comes along with the program, or a community, I should say, probably better yet, that is attached to the program, is really helpful for all people, for everybody who uses the program, to be able to ask and get your questions answered, and the benefit of experience, which isn't actually maybe written down anywhere, is invaluable. So,
just one question I forgot to ask about. Say if I'm a user and I want to make my own new ion channel with a particular. And it's not in your quite extensive library of models that are already there. So how can I make my own little ion channel model and use it?
You can, but it's much more difficult to start from scratch than it is to take something which is analogous to what you're interested in and modify that analogous model
Yeah, because you have this, you called about the model language, and that's something called the mod files, isn't it?
Right, right, right. So NModel stands for Neuron Modeling Description Language.
Mm.
And the intention is that it be entirely descriptive, but
Mm.
sometimes that needs to be honored in the breach
I see.
under certain circumstances.
I see.
But it's intended to be descriptive, and I think
Mm.
mostly it is for channels.
Mm.
Okay, and
Yeah. And then, so what you do then is you make this new mod file, maybe adapt it from an old mod file,
right, right.
and then you
So
compile it.
if you know it's like a Hodgkin Huxley style,
Mm.
model that you're interested in creating.
Mm.
Well, you'd start from you know an existing sodium or potassium channel,
Mm.
and it would be very clear immediately how to modify an assignment statement so that it has a new equation for it or a new parameter or something like that
Huh.
for it. That's anybody can do that. You'd find it harder to go to the reference manual for NModel and you know start from scratch like that.
Mm.
So I think most people use it that way. That is, they see a model, they see a mod file that's very similar to
Mm.
the one that they are
Yeah.
interested in constructing, and they modify a copy then of the.
Mm. Yeah. So good. So now, I mean, you are no longer a sort of a spring chicken. So,
Well, that's for sure.
but I guess now you're sort of in terms of your life's work on this. It's now you feel a little bit more secure that it will actually be maintained even when you cannot contribute anymore.
I think that's correct. That
Mm.
is, I don't know about security, so to speak, but um, I
Mm.
think that I think that there are enough people now who understand in fairly great depth the internals of the program,
Mm.
and also the fact that there are tools these days to explore
Yeah.
complicated programs.
Mm.
Visual Studio Code is
Mm.
one, like I say, and Chat GPT is another.
Yeah, that is
so
sort of what.
so that uh, that the program can continue to be maintained.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was actually involved I'm on one of these scientific advisory boards for one of these sort of like, well, program development projects in NIH,
Mm-hmm.
and so then I actually referred to. Well, for one thing, I asked them it would be really great if the documentation could be like in a Chat GPT style, so that you could ask things.
Yeah. Why can't that happen?
Yeah, no, maybe it is,
I
but
mean,
I guess,
automatically,
yeah,
because
maybe,
I've been every once in a while we get surprised by
uh,
saying, well, Chat GPT knows quite a bit about Neuron
yeah,
actually, and can write hook files.
yeah.
They're
Hmm.
not always the best.
So
Or,
I also, I mean, this is like a. So I also told them about sort of like I was going to have an interview with you, because and sort of have been working on your tool for 50 years, and it says, well, it implies that you need to really be persistent. So it's not like a 3-year thing to
I
get a
think
new
I've
tool.
demonstrated that for
Yeah.
sure.
So,
Yeah.
but I think also, I mean, it's sort of, it's often, I don't think people like enablers like you don't not get the credit that sort of like the people who use your technology to make scientific
I have
discovery.
no complaints at all
Oh,
about that kind
that's
of
good there. But
that aspect.
anyway, but I
So
will.
we've got over the
Yeah.
Neuron is has a grant,
Mm.
a continuing development grant,
Mm.
which expires in 2028. So we're
Ah,
at the very beginning of a 5-year period.
excellent. Yeah.
And that 2028 will, in fact, be the 50th year anniversary of that grant. Computer methods for physiological problems.
So really, so you can, you can get so the same grant has now been will then be renewed for, well, been running for 50 years.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's fantastic. Yeah, we don't certainly don't have that kind of here. It seems like they want to change they get like the often like these funding agencies get like this 3 or 4 or 5 year itch, So they
Well,
want to change
that's that's the standard method for scientific
it. Yeah.
grants.
Mm.
That they start and come to an end.
Yeah.
The it's always easier, it seems, um, for reviewers if they're on the side of as opposed to being computer science, actual electrophysiologists and so forth who uh, say, yes, we should fund this because it's of use to the community.
Mm.
And, as long as that's the case,
Yeah,
then
that's good. So anything particular you would like to add before we end the
well,
podcast?
thanks for the opportunity, but I don't, nothing comes to mind. I think I've touched on most things that
Oh, excellent.
I've been
Yeah.
thinking about.
So then I'll just end by sort of, I was sort of like, on behalf of the community, thanking you actually for this major effort you have done
Well, thank you. Thank
to
you.
support me and many others.
Everything depends on the users
Yeah.
in the
So,
end. Yeah.
well, thanks a lot.
Okay. Bye
Bye.
bye.